I lost my cat, and 6 years later, I found him, but I still had to say goodbye. I want to share this story with you because it feels too big to keep inside. 11 years ago, I adopted a shelter kitten and named him Watson. Most of my life I've lived by myself, and Watson brought warmth and laughter to my home as I navigated the lonely journey of being an author. We went on walks together, we went to work together, we yearned together, we did Reddit AMAs together. He was my best friend. 6 years ago, I decided to leave civilization and move to a remote cabin in the woods. During that transition, while Watson was staying with my grandparents, he got out of their house and disappeared. This is the last picture I have of him, sleeping on my grandma's bed. I spent a month searching for him. I camped in my van and walked every street in that town every day, scanning every alley and porch and calling his name. Every time I saw another cat, my heart would lurch. I started to hallucinate that I was seeing him in the corner of my eye. I called every shelter and posted on every forum, every poll, every porch. I even consulted a remote viewing psychic who saw visions of gnashing teeth. Locals told me there were a lot of coyotes in the area, and it was hard to avoid the conclusion that Watson had been reclaimed by nature. But I held out hope that he had just found a nice old lady somewhere and started a new life. Either way, I had to let him go. Leaving the city and my friends and plunging into the wilderness would have been a lot easier with Watson by my side. Losing my world and my buddy at the same time was a depth of aloneness I had never experienced. I've always found it grotesque when people film themselves crying, but some part of me was astounded by the intensity of the sadness, and I felt a morbid urge to take pictures of what was happening to me. This was the first time I had lost a cat, and I couldn't believe how much it felt like losing a human loved one. I had dreams every night where the entire plot was simply, I'm sitting in a room and Watson walks in. 3 years later, when I lost my dad to lung disease, I would have very similar dreams about him and wake up in tears the same way. I won't say my bond with an animal will ever be comparable to my bond with my human family, but loss is loss. It cuts you in deep, hidden places that you didn't even know were there. 6 years later, I'm living even more remotely on the outer edge of the Washington wastelands. I have a new little buddy named Bob, who brings endless joy and comedy to the 10 by 13 box I call home. And one day, as I'm strolling through Walmart to stock up on frozen vegetables, I get a call from a vet office on the other side of the state. Someone brought in a cat to be treated for minor catfight injuries, and the chip scan brought up my number. Am I the owner of a cat named Watson? They gave me the number of the person who brought him in, and I called them not knowing what I would say. I just needed to talk to them and try to understand. It was an elderly lady named Julie, and her voice was shaking. 9 months after I had given up searching for Watson, he had shown up at Julie's house looking for food. She was in a nearby town and hadn't seen any of my posters. Watson was in bad shape, and it took Julie weeks to win his trust, but eventually he joined her family. She named him Sebastian. It seems something about this handsome man inspires distinguished names. But I needed to know, why did she keep my cat? Why didn't she get his chip scanned and try to find his owner? She said she didn't think of doing that because he looked like he'd escaped from a bad situation. He was skinny and dirty, and the fur around his neck was rubbed off, like he'd been tied up. I choose not to think about what he might have gone through during those 9 months. I also choose not to question this woman's reasons for not taking the steps to reunite him with me. She was an old lady who had just lost her son that same year, and then Watson came wandering into her life. I understood. And I decided to accept the way things turned out. Julie had been taking care of Watson for 6 years. He was part of her family now. I wasn't going to swoop in and snatch him away and make her experience the same pain I'd already healed from. I didn't want to do that to Watson either, rip him out of yet another home and force him into yet another unfamiliar world just so I could have my cat back. He's an old man now. He deserves some peace. But I did want to see him one last time. It took me months to plan a visit, both because of the distance and because on some level I was dreading it. What if Julie's home wasn't a good place? What if Watson wasn't well cared for? What would I do if he didn't seem happy? And even if he did, what would it feel like to actually see my old friend again, only to leave him behind? 2 weeks ago, I finally mustered the courage. I went to Julie's house and waited on her deck while she coaxed him outside with some treats. She told me he's very skittish now and usually runs and hides anytime a stranger comes around. I knew it wouldn't be an exuberant reunion like you might see with a dog. Cat minds are different, cryptic, and unknowable. After 6 years, I wasn't sure if he'd remember me at all. The moment he came out felt just like one of my dreams. I'm sitting in a room and Watson walks in. His reaction was hard to read. I didn't start filming until later because I wanted to be fully present for the reunion, but when he first came out, he seemed confused, constantly glancing back and forth between me and Julie, almost like he was trying to process 2 different lives overlapping. There was no big moment of recognition. Cats don't really do melodrama, but he warmed up to me quickly and started to accept cuddles. Julie said he would never act like that with a stranger. I think at least some part of him did remember. I suspect that cats live in a dreamlike state of consciousness that rarely leaves the present. They don't have an overarching narrative for their lives. They just flow from moment to moment with only a few instinctual threads forming a context. This place is home. This creature is friend. I try to learn from the way animals see the world, the way they adapt to new realities without clinging to any constructs, no rigid identity, no complex self-mythology full of worries or expectations. Just, I am cat in current situation. So when Watson saw me after all that time, I don't think he told himself the story of our lives together. I don't think he thought, oh my God, that's the human that raised me until we were tragically separated 6 years ago. But I do think he felt our history as one of those instinctual threads. I think he thought, there's something about this human that makes me feel warm and safe, so I will let him pet me. That was enough for me. Because the other thing I want to learn from animals is the letting go. They love intensely, but they don't cling to what they can't hold. They allow themselves to move through time. Goodbye, Watson, Sebastian. I hope you brighten your new family's life as much as you brightened mine.